Scene start. A woman's trembling hand slams onto the counter. Her face is a mask of rage, but her eyes scream pure terror. "For $10? She shrieks, her voice cracking. The young attendant flinches, but then he sees it. The almost imperceptible shake of her head, the desperate plea behind the fury. This isn't about the money. The graveyard shift at a Sunoco station off a desolate stretch of highway was a special kind of purgatory. For Liam, it was a penance paid in 8-hour increments, the smell of stale coffee and gasoline a constant reminder of the tuition bills piling up on his desk. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous, sickly green tune, casting long, distorted shadows that danced just at the edge of his vision. He was an art student by day, a connoisseur of light and shadow, and this place was a masterclass in bleakness. Tonight, the air was thick and heavy, promising a storm that refused to break. The silence was punctuated only by the rhythmic buzz of the soda cooler and the distant rumble of passing trucks, each one a ghost fading into the night. At 2:17 a.m., the silence was shattered. A late-model, deep blue Lexus sedan, far too clean for this gritty outpost, pulled up to pump 4 with a smooth, predatory grace. It killed its headlights but left the engine running, a low, guttural purr that seemed to vibrate through the concrete floor of Liam's little glass box. He watched, his artist's eye cataloging the details. The car was pristine, but it sat with a kind of coiled tension. He couldn't see the driver clearly, just a silhouette, but something felt off. People who drove cars like that didn't usually stop at places like this unless they were hopelessly lost or desperately running from something. A few moments later, the passenger door opened. A woman emerged, moving with a jerky, unnatural stiffness. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, the kind one might wear to a nice dinner, but it was subtly rumpled. Her blonde hair was a chaotic masterpiece, as if she'd been running her hands through it for hours. As she walked towards the entrance, the automatic door sighing open to receive her, Liam got a better look at her face. It was pale, drawn, and etched with a deep, unsettling exhaustion. But her eyes were on fire. They were wide, scanning everything, missing nothing, 2 chips of blue ice in a sea of anxiety. She practically burst into the store, the little bell above the door chiming frantically. She strode to the counter, her expensive heels clicking an aggressive staccato on the grimy linoleum. "Pump 4, she said, her voice a low, tight wire. She didn't make eye contact, instead focusing on a pyramid of motor oil cans behind him. She slid a credit card across the counter. It was a platinum Amex. Liam took it, his movements slow and deliberate. He was used to agitated customers, twitchy truckers on too many stimulants, and drunk locals looking for a late-night snack. She was different. Her agitation felt performative. A play being put on for an unseen audience. "Fill up?" he asked, his own voice sounding hollow in the small space. "Yes," she clipped, then corrected herself. "Just put 70 on it." $70, got it. He ran the card. The machine beeped its approval. "You're all set." The pump should be ready now. She didn't move. She just stood there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her knuckles white. She watched the pump through the large, smeary window. Liam tried to busy himself, wiping down a counter that was already as clean as it was going to get. He could feel her stare on the back of his neck. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the whirring of the pump outside. The numbers on the display climbed steadily. 30, 40, $50. The pump clicked off. The transaction was complete. But the engine of the Lexus was still running. The silhouette in the driver's seat hadn't moved. The woman turned back to him. Her face was a storm cloud. "How much was that?" Liam frowned, confused. "You said to put 70 on it." The pump stopped, so it must be close to that. He glanced at his console. "Total is $80.12. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "What did you say?" 80.12, he repeated, pointing to the screen. "The tank must have been emptier than you thought. It took the full 70 in fuel, plus you grabbed a water, and there's a $10 pre-authorization charge for using a card at the pump that sometimes shows up temporarily. Or maybe $10? She cut him off, her voice rising in pitch and volume. It was a shocking escalation. $10 extra? Are you robbing me?" Liam recoiled, holding up his hands. "Whoa, ma'am, no. It's not me. It's the machine. Sometimes, if the tank fills completely, it goes over the preset amount by a little to top it off. The system automatically authorized another 10 to complete it. He was reciting a line he'd used 100 times, a placating, robotic response to a common complaint. But her reaction was anything but common. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "I told you $70. Not 80. Are you deaf? Or are you just stupid? Do you think because I'm a woman I don't know how this works? That you can just tack on extra charges and I'll smile and pay it?" Her voice was echoing in the small store now. Liam's heart started to pound. This was wildly out of proportion. He'd seen people get angry over less, but not like this. This felt desperate. This felt rehearsed. His eyes flicked towards the car outside. The silhouette in the driver's seat shifted slightly, leaning over as if to watch the show. "Ma'am, I can assure you, I'm not trying to—" "Don't you ma'am me, you little thief!" she spat, her hand slamming down on the counter. The impact rattled a display of cheap lighters. It was then that Liam saw it. A dark, ugly purple bruise blooming on the inside of her wrist, just peeking out from the cuff of her dress. His breath caught in his throat. His gaze snapped from the bruise back to her eyes. The rage was there, yes, but underneath it, deep in her pupils, was a frantic, terrified light, a silent, primal scream. His training, his customer service platitudes, they all evaporated. He was no longer a gas station attendant. He was an audience member, and he was suddenly acutely aware that he didn't understand the play. "I want to speak to your manager," she demanded, her voice trembling with what he now recognized was not just rage, but adrenaline. "He's not here at this hour," Liam said, his own voice barely a whisper. "It's just me." "Convenient," she sneered. But as she said it, she did something strange. Her eyes darted towards the candy aisle to her left. She took a step back from the counter, as if to give herself space, and with a sweep of her arm, she accidentally knocked an entire display of Snickers bars to the floor. "Oh, for God's sake!" she yelled, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "I'll get it, ma'am, it's fine," Liam said, moving to come around the counter. "No! You stay right there!" she commanded, pointing a shaking finger at him. She knelt down, her back to the front window in the car outside, and began angrily, clumsily, shoving the candy bars back onto the shelf. As she did, hidden from the view of the driver, she looked directly at Liam. Her furious expression melted away for a fraction of a second, replaced by raw, pleading terror. She mouthed a single silent word. "Help." A cold dread, colder than the air-conditioned chill of the store, washed over him. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The expensive car at a dumpy station, the disheveled appearance, the bruise, the wildly disproportionate anger over $10, the running engine, the man who never got out of the car. It wasn't a complaint. It was a message. It was a desperate, insane gamble to get someone, anyone, to notice. She stood up, her mask of fury firmly back in place. She marched back to the counter, her eyes blazing. She was playing her part to the hilt, a one-woman show on the brink of disaster. "This is unbelievable," she seethed, leaning in close, her voice a harsh whisper now. "You charge me extra money, you have a filthy store, and you provide the worst service I have ever experienced. You know what? This is it. I've had it." She took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs for the crescendo. She looked him dead in the eye, and in that moment, he understood. She wasn't threatening him. She was begging him. She screamed, the sound tearing through the silent night, a sound of pure, calculated desperation. "I'll call the police!" The words hung in the air, electric and final. For a beat, nothing happened. Then, the driver's side door of the Lexus flew open. A man emerged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with an unnerving, fluid economy of motion. Even from this distance, Liam could see the cold, flat look on his face. He wasn't angry. He was annoyed, like a man dealing with a misbehaving pet. He started walking towards the store, his steps measured and deliberate. Each footfall on the pavement was a drumbeat counting down to something terrible. The woman's facade finally cracked. A flicker of genuine panic crossed her face as she watched him approach. She had set the stage, and now the monster was coming to join the play. The man reached the door and pushed it open, the bell chiming a cheerful, ironic welcome. He stepped inside, bringing with him a palpable aura of menace that sucked all the air out of the room. He ignored Liam completely, his eyes fixed on the woman. "Eleanor," he said, his voice deceptively calm, a terrifyingly soft rumble. "Are you causing a scene?" He walked over to her and draped a heavy arm over her shoulders, pulling her into his side. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was an act of ownership. A warning. Eleanor flinched, a small, almost imperceptible tremor that Liam saw clear as day. The man, his grip tightening. The lie hung in the air between them, thin and fragile. Liam's smile felt like a cheap plastic mask, and he was sure the man could see right through it. The man, Marcus, held Liam's gaze for a long, torturous moment. His eyes were utterly unreadable, but they seemed to absorb the sickly green light of the store, reflecting nothing back. It was like looking at the lenses of a camera, cold and analytical. Liam felt himself being weighed, measured, and judged. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low, insistent hum of the coolers, a sound that now seemed to mimic the frantic buzzing in Liam's own skull. Finally, Marcus's lips curved into that same chillingly pleasant smile. "Good," he said, the single word dripping with condescension. He gave Eleanor's shoulder a final proprietary squeeze. "Then we'll be on our way. It's been a long night." He began to turn, guiding Eleanor towards the door. This was it. Liam's window was closing. He had the woman's name. He had a face, but it felt like nothing. They would get in that car and disappear into the night, and Eleanor's desperate, silent scream would be swallowed by the darkness. His nod, his silent promise, would become a monument to his own cowardice. The thought was a spike of ice in his gut. He had to do more. He had to stall. "Sir, wait." Liam's voice was a half-strangled croak. Marcus stopped, his back still to the counter. He didn't turn around, an intentional gesture of dominance. "What is it now?" he asked, his voice losing its velvety edge, replaced by a cold, hard impatience. Liam's mind raced, scrambling for a plausible excuse, a hook to snag them for just a few more minutes. The lie he'd already told was his only weapon. "The transaction, sir. The $80 charge. Since it was an error, I have to void it." He was improvising, pulling from a half-remembered training manual. "For our security cameras, for the inventory logs, then I have to rerun the card for the correct $70 fuel charge. It's policy." He held his breath. It was weak, flimsy corporate nonsense, and a man like Marcus would surely see it for what it was. Marcus turned his head slowly, just enough to fix Liam with a sideways glare. "Forget it," he said, his voice flat. "Keep the change. Consider it a tip for your excellent service." The veiled threat was unmistakable. Let this go or else. But Liam saw Eleanor's eyes. Over Marcus's shoulder, they were wide with a fresh wave of panic, pleading with him not to give up. "He couldn't. I can't, sir," Liam insisted, his voice gaining a desperate strength. He gestured vaguely at a black-domed camera in the corner. "My manager, he's a real stickler. He checks the tapes against the receipts every morning. A $10 discrepancy, he'll have my head. He'll think I'm pocketing the cash. I'll lose my job." He hated how pathetic he sounded, but it was the only angle he had, to appear not as a hero, but as a terrified employee trying to save his own skin. Marcus stared at him, his jaw tight. For a second, Liam thought the man would lunge over the counter. Instead, a look of profound, weary annoyance crossed his face. This was a roadblock he hadn't anticipated, a mundane complication in whatever dark agenda he was pursuing. "Fine," Marcus bit out, turning his full body back to the counter, dragging Eleanor with him. "Fix it, but be quick about it." "Yes, sir." "Of course," Liam said, his hands trembling as he turned to the register. The screen glowed with the details of the transaction. Void. He needed a manager's override. There was no manager. He'd have to fake it. He began tapping keys, deliberately slowly, making the process look far more complicated than it was. Each keystroke was a small victory, another second bought. "What's taking so long?" Marcus's voice was a low growl. He had moved closer, resting one hand on the counter, his knuckles white. He was leaning over Eleanor, caging her in. "Just need to find the right sub-menu," Liam mumbled, not looking up. "This old system. It's always freezing up. He risked a glance. Marcus was staring at him, his mask of civility gone, replaced by a look of pure menace. Eleanor was looking down, her blonde hair hiding her face, her entire body rigid with tension. Liam's fingers felt like clumsy sausages on the keyboard. He typed in a random string of numbers for the override code, and to his immense relief, the machine simply asked him to confirm the void. He hit enter. The receipt printer whirred to life, spitting out a thin slip of paper. "Okay, got it voided," Liam announced, his voice tight. "Now I just need a signature from the card holder on the void slip for the bank's records." Another lie, but it sounded official. He slid the flimsy receipt and a cheap ballpoint pen across the counter. Marcus didn't move. "Give it to her," he commanded. Liam pushed the pen and paper closer to Eleanor. Her hand snaked out to take it, and for a fleeting second, her trembling fingers brushed against his. Her skin was ice cold. She bent over the receipt, her body shielding it from Marcus's view. Marcus, his patience clearly evaporated, turned his head to look out the front window, scanning the empty highway. It was a brief moment, a crack in his vigilance. But it was the only one they were going to get. Eleanor scribbled a signature, an illegible scrawl that was likely not her name. But she didn't stop there. Liam watched, his heart in his throat as the pen kept moving, her hand flying across the back of the small slip of paper, frantic and silent. It took less than 3 seconds. "Done," she whispered, pushing it back towards Liam. Marcus turned back instantly. "Card," he said, not to Liam but to Eleanor. She fumbled in the pocket of her dress, her movements jerky. She pulled out the platinum Amex and held it out. Marcus snatched it from her fingers and slapped it down on the counter in front of Liam. $70 now! Liam took the card, his hand shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He swiped it through the machine, his eyes locked on the little receipt on the counter next to him. It lay face down. The secrets it held were burning a hole through the paper. He completed the transaction as fast as he could, the machine printing a second final receipt. "All set," he said, his voice cracking. Marcus didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed Eleanor's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Let's go." He pulled her, stumbling towards the door. He didn't look back. At the door, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. The smile was gone. His face was a cold, hard promise of violence. "You have a good night," he said, and the words sounded like a death sentence. Then they were gone. The door side shut, the bell chiming its cheerful, mocking farewell. The deep blue Lexus roared to life, its tires spitting gravel as it peeled out of the station and vanished into the oppressive darkness. Liam stood frozen for a full 10 seconds, the silence rushing back in, heavier and more terrifying than before. His legs felt weak, his shirt soaked with a cold sweat. He was alone. His gaze fell to the counter, to the void slip. With a shaking hand, he reached out and picked it up. The front was just as he expected, the voided transaction details and Eleanor's frantic, meaningless signature. He took a deep, shuddering breath, tasting the metallic tang of fear in the back of his throat. He turned it over. Scrawled in shaky, desperate letters were 2 words and a symbol. A message from a ghost. It wasn't a license plate. It wasn't a plea for help. It was something far more urgent, far more terrifying. Lake Anna, sunrise. The words on the back of the receipt seemed to burn in the sickly fluorescent light. Lake Anna, sunrise. It wasn't a clue. It was a death sentence with a deadline. Liam's blood ran cold, the adrenaline that had sustained him through the confrontation curdling into a thick, paralyzing dread. His mind, trained to see shapes and compositions, now saw only 2 things, the terrifyingly vague expanse of a lake and the rapidly approaching dawn. Sunrise. He fumbled for his phone, his thumb smudging the screen as he swiped to the clock. 2:32 a.m. Sunrise in this part of Virginia in mid-September was just after 6:45 a.m. He had 4 hours. 4 hours to do what? His first instinct, the only sane one, was to follow through on Eleanor's desperate plea. He dialed 911, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The phone rang twice before a calm, dispassionate female voice answered. 911, what is the address of your emergency? I'm at the Sunoco gas station on Route 33, just past the county line, Liam stammered, the words tumbling out of him. I need help. A woman, I think she's been kidnapped. Her name is Eleanor Vance. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Okay, sir, slow down. What is your name? Liam Taylor. Okay, Liam, tell me exactly what you witnessed. He tried, but the story came out in a disjointed, panicked mess. He talked about the fancy car, the woman's strange anger over $10, the bruise on her wrist, the man's menacing calm. It sounded insane even to his own ears. He was describing feelings, impressions, a silent scream he couldn't prove he'd seen. Sir, did the man physically assault the woman in your presence? The dispatcher asked, her tone remaining unnervingly neutral. No, but he had her. You should have seen his eyes. And she left a note. She gave me a note. She gave you a note? For the first time, there was a flicker of interest. What does it say? Lake Anna, sunrise. Another pause. More typing. Lake Anna. Sir, are you aware that Lake Anna has over 200 miles of shoreline spanning 3 counties? No, I don't know. Look, he was driving a dark blue Lexus sedan, a new one. You can put out an alert, can't you? An Amber Alert. An Amber Alert is for a missing child, sir. Did you get a license plate number? No, Liam admitted, a wave of nausea rolling over him. It happened so fast. He peeled out of here. And you have no description of the man other than tall? He was wearing dark clothes. He had dark hair. I was scared, okay? I wasn't taking notes. The frustration and fear boiled over into anger. Aren't you listening to me? A woman's life is in danger. Sir, we take all calls seriously, the dispatcher said, her voice now edged with a practiced, placating firmness. But without a license plate, a specific crime, or a clear last known direction of travel, there is very little for patrol units to act on at this moment. A bolo for a dark blue Lexus on a major highway at night isn't feasible. So you're not going to do anything? Liam asked, aghast. I've logged the incident. I can dispatch an officer to your location to take a full statement. Due to shift change and current call volume, it may be 60 to 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Liam felt the world tilt on its axis. In 90 minutes, the sky would be turning from black to a bruised purple. In 90 minutes, it could all be over. He was shouting into a void, a bureaucratic system that was designed to respond to events, not to prevent them. Forget it, Liam said, his voice hollow. He ended the call before she could reply. He was alone. Utterly and completely alone. For a moment, he leaned against the counter, the linoleum cool against his forehead, and let the sheer hopelessness wash over him. He could do what the dispatcher suggested. Wait. Wait for a deputy to show up an hour and a half from now, take his statement with a tired, skeptical look, and file a report that would be buried by morning. He could lock up the station at the end of his shift, go home to his charcoal sketches and his overdue textbooks, and spend the rest of his life wondering what happened to the woman with the terrified blue eyes. He looked down at the receipt in his hand. Lake Anna, sunrise. It wasn't a clue left for the police. It was a clue left for him. She had looked him in the eye, gambled her life on the hope that the tired kid behind the counter would see past the charade. He had nodded. He had made a promise. A new feeling began to burn through the fog of his fear, a cold, sharp anger. Anger at the man, at the indifferent dispatcher, at a world where someone could scream for help and be met with procedure and protocol. He wouldn't wait. Action galvanized him. His limbs, heavy with dread moments before, now felt light and purposeful. He shoved the receipt into his pocket and ran to the back office, a small, cluttered room with a dinosaur of a desktop computer. He typed Lake Anna into the search bar. The dispatcher was right. The map that loaded showed a sprawling, serpentine body of water, a geographic monster. It was impossible. But what would a man like Marcus want? Seclusion, privacy, a place where a scream wouldn't be heard. Liam clicked on the satellite view, his artist's eye scanning the terrain. He ignored the clusters of vacation homes and marinas. He looked for the empty spaces, the dense patches of woods that ran right up to the water's edge. He searched for access points, old service roads, public boat ramps, remote state park entrances, places one could drive to in the middle of the night without drawing attention. He found a section on the lake's less developed southern shore, A state park? Doubt that. No, that was a different park. Lake Anna State Park. It had a public boat ramp, surrounded by dense woods and a few rustic rentable cabins that would be closed for the season. It was isolated. It was plausible. It was a 40-minute drive from his current location. It was a wild guess, a shot in the absolute dark, but it was better than nothing. He had a destination. Now he needed to prepare. His mind cataloged the meager resources of the gas station. He grabbed the heaviest maglite from under the counter. Its beam was weak, the batteries probably half dead. He went to the automotive aisle and hesitated for a second before taking a heavy, four-way tire iron from the shelf. The cold, dense weight of it in his hand felt both ridiculous and terrifyingly necessary. He stuffed a few protein bars and a bottle of water into the pockets of his hoodie. He was going to war with office supplies and junk food. The final act was the hardest. He walked to the front door, the key to the station in his hand. This was his job. This was his tuition money. This was the thin, frayed rope he was clinging to in order to pull himself out of a life of greasy counters and graveyard shifts. Leaving meant letting go of that rope. It meant getting fired without a doubt. It meant failing a class because he couldn't afford the supplies. It meant facing a future even bleaker than the one he was living. He looked out the window at his own car. A beat-to-hell 1998 Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a permanent scent of turpentine from his art supplies. It was a pathetic chariot for a quest like this. He thought of Eleanor's eyes. He thought of his nod. With a final, decisive click, he locked the door of the Sunoco station. He abandoned his post. He abandoned his job. He walked out into the damp, pre-dawn air, the weight of the tire iron bumping against his leg. He slid into the driver's seat of his car, the familiar squeal of the springs a strange comfort. He put the key in the ignition, his hand hovering. The sheer, monumental insanity of what he was about to do crashed down on him. He was an art student, not a hero. He was about to drive to a remote location to confront a dangerous man he knew nothing about, all based on a cryptic note from a stranger. He could die. Just as he was about to turn the key, his phone buzzed on the passenger seat. The screen lit up. Unknown number. He answered, his heart leaping with a sudden, desperate hope. Maybe it was a detective. Maybe they'd found something. "This is Deputy Rourke with the county sheriff's office," a gruff, tired voice said. "I'm just following up on the call you made to dispatch. About a customer dispute?" Liam's hope died instantly. "It wasn't a dispute," he said through gritted teeth. "It was a kidnapping." "Right," the deputy sighed, the sound dripping with skepticism. "Listen, son, we've logged the incident. I'm tied up on a DUI across the county, but I can swing by your location to take that statement in about, 60 to 90 minutes. Just sit tight, 60 to 90 minutes. The same useless, fatal timeline." He was on his own. The confirmation was a cold, clarifying slap in the face. "I can't wait," Liam said, his voice hard, resolute, a voice he didn't recognize as his own. "Sir, I would strongly advise you not to—" Liam hung up the phone, tossing it onto the passenger seat. He was done with advice. He was done with waiting. He twisted the key. The Honda's small engine coughed to life with a rattling roar. He slammed the car into gear and peeled out of the Sunoco station, his tires kicking up the same gravel Marcus's Lexus had, a pale imitation of the predator he was now chasing into the dying night. The 40-minute drive to Lake Anna was a lifetime. Liam's beat-up Honda Civic, usually a comforting cocoon of familiar rattles and smells, felt like a flimsy tin can hurtling through an abyss. His hands were fused to the steering wheel, his knuckles white mountains on a pale landscape. The adrenaline from the gas station had burned off, leaving behind a residue of pure crystalline fear. It was a cold, heavy thing in the pit of his stomach. The world outside his cracked windshield was a tunnel of impenetrable black, the road illuminated only by the weak yellow throw of his headlights. Trees, skeletal and menacing, clawed at the edges of the light. Every shadow seemed to coalesce into the shape of the blue Lexus. Every rustle in the undergrowth sounded like a footstep. "What are you doing?" The question, a venomous whisper in his own mind, grew louder with every mile. He was an art student. His greatest conflicts were fought with charcoal on a canvas, a battle of composition and contrast. He was armed with a tire iron he barely knew how to use, chasing a man who radiated a quiet, predatory violence that Liam had only ever seen in movies. He pictured Marcus's face, the calm, pleasant smile that didn't reach his dead eyes. He imagined what a man like that was capable of. The bruise on Eleanor's wrist was just the beginning. A single dark brush stroke on a canvas of cruelty he couldn't begin to comprehend. Sunrise. The word was a drumbeat in his head. What happened at sunrise? Why the deadline? The ambiguity was more terrifying than any specific threat. Doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep in. What if he'd read it all wrong? What if it was just a toxic relationship, a lover's quarrel that had gotten out of hand? He was risking his job, his future, maybe even his life, based on a gut feeling and a frantic scrawl on a receipt. He was an idiot. A naive, romantic idiot charging into a situation that was none of his business. He almost turned the car around. It would be so easy. Just find a place to turn, drive back to the Sunoco, and wait for the deputy. He could feign ignorance, claim the couple had spooked him so badly he'd locked up and hidden in the back room. He could salvage his job, salvage his life. Then, a flash of memory, so vivid it was like a photograph burned onto his retinas. Eleanor's eyes locked on his over the scattered candy bars. The mask of fury was gone, and for one raw, unguarded second, he had seen a terror so profound it had felt like looking into a grave. He remembered the ice-cold touch of her skin as their fingers brushed. That was real. That terror was real. He had nodded. He had made a promise. He pressed his foot down harder on the accelerator. The Honda's engine whined in protest, but the car lurched forward, eating up the dark road. The doubt was still there, but it was quieter now, relegated to the back seat. In its place, a grim, unfamiliar resolve settled in. He didn't know what he would do when he got there, but he knew he couldn't turn back. A pair of brilliant white headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, approaching fast. Liam's heart leaped into his throat. Alexis? Was it Marcus? Had he somehow circled back? The lights grew larger, blindingly bright, filling his small car. He gripped the tire iron on the passenger seat, his palms slick with sweat. The vehicle drew alongside him, a massive 18-wheeler, its horn blaring as it thundered past, shaking his tiny car in its wake. Liam was left in its red-tailed darkness, his heart pounding, his relief so intense it made him dizzy. He checked the clock on his dashboard. 3:58 a.m. Time was slipping away. As he rounded a long bend, he saw the first sign, its green, reflective letters ghostly in his headlights. Lake Anna State Park, 5 miles, 5 more miles. The final leg of a journey he never asked for. He could see a change in the sky ahead, a subtle shift on the eastern horizon. The absolute inky black was softening to a deep, bruised indigo. Dawn was coming. He reached the park entrance, a large wooden archway with a sturdy metal gate drawn across it. Park closed, sunset to 8 a.m. Of course. He killed the engine and the headlights, plunging himself into a sudden, disorienting silence. The woods, which had been a rushing blur, were now a living, breathing entity around him, full of clicks, whispers, and unseen movements. He couldn't get in this way. He remembered the map, the small access roads that dotted the park's perimeter. He started the car again and drove slowly along the park's edge, his eyes scanning the dense tree line. About a quarter-mile down, he found it. A narrow, unmarked gap in the trees, little more than a dirt track, hopelessly overgrown. It was perfect. He pulled his car onto the muddy shoulder, trying to conceal it as best he could. He shut off the engine one last time. This was it. He was leaving the last vestiges of his world behind. He grabbed the maglite and the tire iron. The flashlight cast a pathetic, wobbly circle of light. The tire iron felt impossibly heavy, a fool's scepter. He took a deep breath, the air cold and damp, smelling of pine and wet earth, and pushed his way through the overgrown brush onto the dirt track. He was on foot. The woods closed in around him immediately, a cathedral of darkness. The canopy of leaves blotted out the sky, making the indigo horizon disappear. His world shrank to the small dancing pool of light at his feet. Every snap of a twig under his sneakers sounded like a gunshot. The hoot of a distant owl made him jump. He was an intruder here, a trespasser in a world that was not his own. He knew the boat ramp was his best bet. It was the most logical point of entry to the water. He kept moving, trying to head in what he hoped was the direction of the lake, his ears straining, his senses on a razor's edge. He walked for what felt like an eternity, the tire iron held in a white-knuckled grip, the uselessness of it becoming more apparent with every step. He was beginning to think his guess had been wrong, that he was just a lost idiot in the middle of the woods. He was about to turn back when he smelled it. Faint but unmistakable. Gasoline. Not the fresh, sharp scent from the station, but a stale, potent odor. He followed the smell, moving more slowly now, his flashlight beam cutting low across the forest floor. He pushed through a thicket of ferns and stopped dead. His breath caught in his chest. There, not 50 feet from him, tucked clumsily behind a curtain of ancient pine trees, was the car. The deep blue Lexus. Its polished paint caught the weak beam of his flashlight, a slash of impossible modernity in the primeval woods. It had been driven recklessly down the dirt track and parked hastily, a long scratch marring the passenger side door. The engine was cold, but the air around it still held that faint, telling scent. Liam dropped to a crouch behind a fallen log, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He clicked off his flashlight, plunging himself into near-total darkness. He was here. He was right. The confirmation wasn't a relief. It was a tidal wave of terror. They were close. The boogeyman was real, and he had just stumbled into his lair. Somewhere in the suffocating darkness ahead, past the silent waiting car, was a monster. And with him was Eleanor. The sight of the Lexus, a dark metallic beast resting in the primordial woods, short-circuited Liam's brain. For a full minute, he remained frozen behind the log, a prey animal that had just stumbled upon the predator's den. His every instinct screamed at him to turn, to run, to flee back to his pathetic car and drive until the sun came up. But the image of Eleanor's face, a ghostly imprint on his memory, held him fast. He hadn't come this far to run. He forced air into his lungs, a ragged, shallow breath that did little to calm the frantic hummingbird of his heart. He was an art student. He knew the value of darkness. It was his only shield, his only ally. He had to use it. The eastern sky was now a soft, bruised gray, the kind of light that precedes the dawn, stealing the deepest shadows. His time was running out. Moving with a slowness he didn't know he possessed, Liam rose from his crouch. He placed each foot with surgical precision, testing the ground before committing his weight, avoiding the brittle, noisy carpet of fallen leaves wherever he could. The tire iron was a cold, awkward weight in his right hand. His maglite was off, useless now in the growing twilight. He was navigating by instinct, moving towards the faint, rhythmic sound of water lapping against a shore. He used the thick trunks of pine trees as cover, melting from one shadow to the next. He kept the silent, menacing Lexus in his peripheral vision, a fixed point in his terrifying new universe. The path from the car was subtle, just a trail of bent ferns and disturbed earth leading deeper into the woods towards the lake. He followed it. The air grew cooler, damper. The smell of wet stone and decaying plants became stronger. He was getting close. Then he saw it. Through a latticework of bare branches, a pinprick of warm, yellow light. It was a beacon in the monochrome landscape of pre-dawn, a sign of life that promised only death. A cabin. It was a small, rustic structure of dark wood, perched just 100 feet from the water's edge, almost completely swallowed by the surrounding forest. One of the rental cabins he'd seen on the map, isolated from the others. A single window glowed, casting a sickly rectangle of light onto the forest floor. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, a grotesque parody of domestic comfort. Liam's mouth was dry, his blood roaring in his ears. This was the place. He dropped to his belly, the damp earth soaking through the knees of his jeans, and began to crawl the final distance. The ground was cold, littered with sharp stones and twigs that dug into his palms. He moved like a slug, every muscle screaming in protest, until he reached the relative cover of a large rhododendron bush just 20 feet from the illuminated window. He peered through the waxy leaves, his heart threatening to punch its way through his ribs. The window was grimy, streaked with dirt, but he could see inside. The scene was chillingly mundane. Marcus was there, his back to the window, standing in front of a small kitchenette. He wasn't brandishing a weapon or pacing like a caged animal. He was making coffee, the methodical movements of his hands betraying no agitation. He wore the same dark clothes, but he seemed perfectly at home, a homeowner in his own private hell. Then Liam saw Eleanor. She was sitting in a simple wooden chair at a small table, facing him, though her gaze was distant and unfocused. She wasn't tied up. She wasn't gagged. But she was a prisoner all the same. Her body was coiled with a tension so profound it seemed to hum in the air. She held herself perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, like a student waiting for a cruel headmaster. Every time Marcus moved, she flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor. The chains weren't made of rope. They were forged from pure terror. Marcus turned from the coffee pot, a steaming mug in his hand. He didn't give it to her. He sat down opposite her, placing the mug on the table. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Eleanor," he said. His voice was muffled by the glass, but the tone was clear. It was the sound of a man who had reached the end of his patience. Eleanor didn't answer. She just stared at the table, her expression blank, a mask of strategic emptiness. Marcus sighed, a sound of theatrical frustration. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek silver satellite phone. Liam's blood ran cold. This wasn't some random act of violence. This was organized, professional. Marcus dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. "It's me," he said. "We're here." No complications." He shot a dark, venomous look at Eleanor. "Well, nothing I can't handle." Liam strained to hear, pressing his ear closer to the dirt, willing the words to travel through the glass. "Yes. The package is secure," Marcus continued, his voice low and businesslike. "She's been..." "Quiet." There was a pause. Liam watched Marcus's face tighten. "Just make sure you're on time. The buyer doesn't like to be kept waiting. First light at the dock. Have the transfer ready." The words hit Liam like a physical blow. Package, buyer, transfer. This wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a business transaction. Eleanor was a commodity, a piece of merchandise to be sold. Sunrise wasn't a deadline for her murder. It was a delivery time. And the boat. It wasn't an escape plan. It was the arrival of the customer. The threat wasn't just Marcus anymore. It was bigger. There were others coming. Liam's mind reeled. His pathetic plan to rush in with a tire iron was not just suicidal. It was laughably inadequate. He was out of his depth in a way he couldn't have possibly imagined. He had to get out. He had to get back to a place with a signal and call the police again, this time with real, actionable intelligence. A location, a time frame, a boat. They would have to listen this time. He began to back away, moving with agonizing slowness, his eyes still locked on the horrifying diorama in the cabin. He pushed himself backward with his hands, his jeans snagging on a root. He was almost clear of the bush. He was going to make it, and then it happened. His left knee, seeking purchase on the soft ground, came down squarely on a dry, brittle branch he hadn't seen in the darkness. Crack! The sound was impossibly loud, a gunshot in the silent woods. It was a sound of catastrophic failure. Inside the cabin, Marcus froze. His conversation on the phone stopped mid-sentence. His head, which had been bent slightly downwards, snapped up. He wasn't looking at Eleanor anymore. He was looking directly at the window, his eyes narrowing, his entire body becoming a statue of predatory stillness. He had heard it. Liam's heart stopped. He was no longer the observer. He was no longer the ghost in the woods. In that one sickening, sound-filled moment, he had become the hunted.